Welcome everyone to our panel discussion. I think from our daily lives we've all realized how quickly digital technologies are moving, and having 2 kids, every time I go to the Toys R Us in Times Square, it feels a bit like science fiction to me. But obviously the consumer sector is moving at a bit different speeds than life science. If I go to my GP at home, I have more this flashback of I'm in the movie of the 70s. So somehow there's a disparate speed in these 2 worlds. And there might be good reasons for it. There might be things holding us back. So I think it's really time for this panel to discuss of what are the opportunities we're having by digitizing the medical sector. What are the things that are holding us back, and what can we do about it? And for the next hour or so, I would like to introduce our panelists here. I'll start on my left. Miguel González Sancho is heading the unit for e-health well-being at AGIN at the European Commission at DG Connect. You already heard Nabarun Dasgupta in the presentation before on the Radar project. We have Yves Theuns, who is VP for Research at Nokia, and Lisbeth Lage. How do you pronounce Lage? Laga. Lisbeth Laga was a program director for life science technology at the IMEC in Leuven, which is an interdisciplinary high-tech research center. We know predictions about the future are difficult, but I'd nevertheless ask my panelists to take a look in the crystal ball, and if they look at the status quo today, what is state of the art, and what are the big opportunities that digital health will bring upon us in the near future? Maybe we start ladies first on the left.
I always have the honor, thank you. At IMEC we are developing the Internet of Medical Things, going from very portable point-of-care devices to smart pills, to sensors, environmental sensors, sensors on humans that can sense physiological parameters online, and also more recently looking at the data aspect and data trust. So what I believe is that these sensors will come. Of course, it will first come in let's say, in the easy applications, the environmental sensors, automotive sensors, and so on. And what I believe is that the medical sector is completely unprepared for that. But what I'm hoping is that via the IMI and via, let's say, consortia that help bring these technologies to the medical sector, we actually will move towards a much more effective healthcare system, getting away from the 70s picture to something that is actually to the benefit of the patients.
Thank you. Yves, I think networks, we heard Internet of Things, is of course a very important component. I think Nokia is one of the players in the game.
Yeah. So for Nokia, obviously, I mean, it's all about engineering and technology. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for the invite. This is not my typical bio talk, I should say, but I'm very interested to see the let's say the different industries meet and technology and the applications. So if you look a little bit at the advances in technology, these are pretty much at the core of all of the advances that we see, and we typically look at them as being those that relate to the infrastructure. If you think about technologies like 5G, that should be combining things like low power and wide area networking. That enables all kinds of communicating devices to work on battery lives for years. I mean, there's been big advances in the last couple of years, and there's many more coming. So these are all kind of like enablers for what we talk about, the Internet of Things and different application domains. So second thing is everything that has to do with software. There's a lot of software in play here. In any IoT environment, one of the challenges is always to set up a secure association between the devices, the sensors, and then all of the applications that sit on the back end. And there's a lot of technology that goes in there, crypto technology and all of these kind of things that you need in order to make certain that you have integrity of your data, privacy, but also that you know that the authenticity comes from a certain patient and not anybody else. So that's the second layer, is the software. The third thing is the sensors and applications, and obviously these are very much different in every one of the domains that we look at. Obviously, like Lisbeth was saying, there's a lot of advances there, very much specific to the health industry. We see the same thing in smart cities. You see the same thing in automotive, utilities, I mean, smart grids and stuff like that and so forth. I mean, there's millions, billions of little devices that start communicating, and all industry processes are getting kind of like improved. So from that perspective, Nokia has selected a number of domains where we are having a very big interest in terms of helping these industries with IoT technologies. One of those is the digital health. We announced in April of 2016 the acquisition of Withings, which is one of these companies that has wearables and smart weight balances and stuff like that. I mean, obviously there's multiple of those in the industry, but it's kind of like our touch point from which we want to further build the business around that. So from that perspective, when we're looking at IMI, it's really as an industry platform where both the technology companies as well as the very specific application domain and digital health can come together and think through technical aspects, legal aspects, standardization, and so forth in this area.
Thank you. So now from your experience, if you look in the future, anything where you make a prediction saying, where's the major breakthrough coming?
So I think the increase in citizen science is something that we've just started to touch, and so this is the data from all these sensors. There's a limited pool of statisticians and data scientists who can crunch these numbers right now, but I think just in the same way that programming was a very specialized thing a generation ago, and a generation from now, I think there will be people who can handle these data in a very fluid way, and a lot of those folks may not be formally trained in the way that it has been up to this point. So I see the rise in citizen science being a major driving force in how the data are used coming in the future.
Thank you. Miguel, from the Commission perspective, do you have some kind of roadmap where you say this is where it's heading, or?
Yes, indeed. I was going to say I come from a public policy perspective, so I don't have a crystal ball, I'm afraid, like the scientists have. But okay, our role is to support knowledge and to in its generation, but also to support that that knowledge turns into something concrete and that there's impact for it. And from that perspective, well, we are busy in the Commission doing something which is called we call the digital single market, which is I think it's self-explanatory, which is to say how to build on the power, let's say, of digital technology to push further economic and social progress in Europe, and bringing the coming to the topic of today, a couple of things there. Digital infrastructure, it has been mentioned. So we are having initiative on cloud computing, high performance computing, Internet of Things, etc., which have been supporting for years. So the idea there is, to which extent do we need common resources in Europe, tools for supporting development, in particular in the area of health, for that matter. So how is it going to work? Cloud computer capacity, for instance, resources. How does it apply to the area of health? Very second thing, also within this digital single market, is the rules of the data game, let's say, because this is very much a game about data. So privacy, of course. We have a new regulatory framework in place. Is it where there's quite a few, health is mentioned quite a few times in there. These are sensitive data. Consent is very important. So is it how are we going to go about implementing this framework? Is it something that is good for research or not? I mean, I'm hearing very different opinions, but it's not only about privacy. It's also other things. It's the free flow of data. We've been looking into the health sector. There's quite a few restrictions in terms of where the data need to be located, ownership, and things like that. So we need to address the rules of the data game, as I said. Then another one important which we're looking into is mobile health, which is a good test ground, I would say, for what I've said before, having the infrastructure, but then also the right rules in there. So, of course, it generates lots of data. We're looking into issues around safety, of the applications, privacy issues, validity of the data generated in a health context. And it's important in there to, of course, or what can be done with this data from the citizens, from the patients, but also in the other direction, i.e. that the citizens and the patients can get feedback about the treatments, for instance, the drugs they take, etc. And that's about it. Just wanted to mention, because I was in a conference yesterday, VPH, Virtual Physiological Human. So I've been hearing a lot of about modeling yesterday. And there was a lot, I think, about modeling organs, treatments, interventions, but I saw less about modeling of drugs, I would say. I know it's difficult, but it's an area, this area of modeling in which we have been supporting through research for many, many years, and we still have a call coming up soon, or in silico testing of medical products. And I would be interested, because of this setting, where in how do we take research in this area to the market and to actual products? Is modeling, what is the validity of modeling of drugs? I was longer than the other, sorry.
No, thank you, because you already took my next question of what are the challenges and bottlenecks that are holding us back. And you already
So I
had
replied already?
No, you asked the right questions, so we
I
let
asked the questions,
our
yeah.
panelists or the audience reply. If you have any questions from the audience, please go to a microphone so people on the web can hear you.
Hello? Hello? Oh, sorry, Chris Mother. I have a question with regard to all that applications and Internet of Things. How privacy will be kept? Is it kind of audit of those applications? Because thousands of vendors will be delivering. There are harvesters who are taking information from web, from social media. How you ensure that privacy is kept? And will be no legal claims. You used my posts on internet. Is it any framework or technical legal concept how to ensure it? I'm sorry the question was asked, but the collapse of welfare state stopped me from coming earlier.
Who wants to reply?
Well, I understood the question is about privacy of apps in this area of health and well-being. So what I can say from our side is that we have recently come up with a code of on privacy and apps. This has been actually not done by the Commission, but helped by the Commission, but it has been a group of stakeholders that have come up with this guidance, if you like. And what this is an interpretation of what is good practice in terms of the current regulation. So if I come up with an app on the market, I should pay attention to a number of things to inform the user of how the information is kept and things like that. This is guidance. This is what I can say. Obviously, it's up there for voluntary, take up, if you like. So let's see what happens with that. That's what I could say from my side.
Thank you very much. So there is no mechanism for ensuring, because all companies here are ethical and working according to regulations, but there are thousands of companies across the world that not necessarily might be. And if I install app on voluntary app, I might not be able to know whatever this application can do besides getting information. Is it any way of code audit of or check by specialists if this is really doing what is promised to? It's like installing updates on your system without knowing source. It's quite dangerous from IT security, and then of course privacy.
Okay, what I can say, of course, there's the regulatory framework for privacy that applies in Europe. And then when it comes to what you're saying, of course, there's a role to play there for the app stores, for these companies who accept I think recently Apple even came up with some sort of guidance for what they can accept in terms of apps in this area of, let's say, health and well-being. That's as far as I can respond.
Thank you.
Please.
Hi, Sanjay Datta with JDRF. Can you help me understand when an app or app containing cell phone or a software device is categorized now as a medical device by the regulators? And at least in the field of our work, which is type 1 diabetes, that has become a rate-limiting factor in incentivizing technology companies to adopt health softwares in them, because it gets regulated at that time. Sorry, for decision making, I'm talking about decision support tools.
I think there's a whole session about regulatory affairs later in the day. So can we postpone the question to that session, please?
Absolutely.
Keep note. Thank you.
But it's true that I think is one of the things that is holding back technology players to go fast in the medical sector. But it's not only at the level of apps. So for me, what I believe is that the new wave of technology is a combination of sensor, data analytics, and trusted data sharing. And the three aspects are very important. And at this moment, the value chains are completely not aligned. They're starting to get aligned for easy applications. You know, a smart thermostat in your house is a typical example that people probably have heard about. But for the medical, I do not see even an effort to get those aligned. So there's an enormous amount of fantastic sensors which have been developed in our Horizon 2020 projects and in private companies, lying in the cupboard, would be very useful in the medical sector, but you know, there's apparently no money to bring it further. The data people are focusing on apps. You know, there's challenges with apps and getting them regulated. It's true, but the apps today do not use the wealth of sensors that could bring them a richness of information that would, you know, revolutionize the world. And then also for the trusted data sharing, we are running against you know, problems of Europe versus United States, hospital versus hospital, and also there I do not see, perhaps there are people that are doing the right things within that community, but I don't see any alignment of all these communities. And what I believe is that IMI could actually play a huge role there.
Yeah, good morning. Taking into consideration the time horizon, which is 5 years for an MI project, what would be your recommendations for the 3 or 4 point of focalization or focus for the next few years? Because we understand it's a very, very large domain, so we need to start somewhere. So what would be the, I have two questions. What would be the technologies that we have to focus on? And second, what are the key enabling or I would say favorable factors that have to be promoted to get into a sustainable first stage from where we can expand?
Yeah. Simple question, very difficult answer, I'm sure. So to a certain extent, I mean, obviously technologies and so forth will evolve. And when we're talking about things like 5G communication networks, that's only 2020 that you actually will see that there. So you can already now kind of like see what the technology will bring there. Where I think very large advances will be is with respect to the miniaturization of sensors and so forth, where there's still steps to be taken technological wise. So you can kind of like anticipate those as well. And then, yeah, the whole regulatory framework. If that kind of like clears up, then a large inhibitor, I think, for very fast innovation will be gone. But obviously, that's an interplay between industry interests, policy interests and so forth. So there I think as well, as the technologies are becoming available, there's a bit of a pressure with respect to making policies and so forth, and answering these legal questions as to how to use the technology. So there as well in the next 5 years, I think we'll see a large number of advances. That's where IMI can obviously and should be helping the industry.
Yeah, so maybe to let's say, go on my previous remark, but to your remark, I think it's about alignment of value chains. So I think within a framework of 5 years' time, you're not going to develop a completely new genomics technology, including the sequencing machine from scratch, because that's a huge investment. But there's so many companies that have already worked out concepts to some extent, but have difficulties in getting it to the market because value chains are not aligned. So I think that within 5 years, aligning the value chains is actually very achievable.
I think there's transformative change and incremental change, and I think mechanisms like the joint undertakings in general are very good for incremental change. For transformative change, sometimes you also need entities that are willing to push the bounds of what's the rules and regulations, and it's hard to find a legitimate place for them sometimes within some of these frameworks, but some of the more transformative changes may well come from outside formally the structure and system, but should be rapidly incorporated when, as soon as possible, I guess.
Okay, I agree with everything that has been said. And from my side, I would say what the important factors, so validation. Validation, that's something that in our research projects is a stage, research project for technology and health, where, we have this kind of issue there, how to, go really to the medical kind of, so we have the nice technology, it has been said, sitting in campus sometimes, but really to take it from the lab to the clinic, as it was said in the conference I was at yesterday. That's an important thing. What I want to say as a factor, something which is happening, I've been also hearing, is that there's a new actor, player in this healthcare and technology landscape, which is the patient. I mean, the person is coming more at the center, and it means very practically that, the traditional doctor is challenged in his practice. He's going to give a second or a third opinion, and the patient is actively playing a role, and he's the owner of the data, and he has a say. And then linked to that, of course, things are happening out there on the market. We have, people like big players like Google, Apple, others, which are entering into this space. So something is going to happen one way or the other because of that. They are buying data, they are buying professionals and having mergers, and that's something that the mix is going to change somehow, somewhere. I don't know which direction this is going to go, but the digital revolution has arrived to healthcare also, not just to hotels and to taxis.
But unfortunately today, a lot of these companies are actually in the United States or in Korea. And I think that Europe should try to do something there. We have lots of good concepts with lots of good data analytics, but we don't manage, we are not so efficient in aligning the value chains and in getting it to the market.
Couldn't agree more.
Just one question there, and then Anthony.
So my question was really, Miguel set it up, was around consumer adoption. So I'm from Asthma UK, and we've recently been doing some work which would say a quarter of people with asthma will quite happily replace their asthma review with a technology that they don't even know what it is, which is the promise of technology. But what they're also doing, and this is for smart inhalers, is they are less likely to change their operating system on their mobile phone than change their medication. So if you've got a sensor that's linked to your medication, but it would require you to lose data on your app or which ones are they going to choose? And I think it would just be really interesting to get the panel's view on what the consumer adoption trends are going to be. And is, again, the profession prepared for not just the patient having information, but the patient having choices about which bit of the value chain they're going to pick.
Yeah. Maybe, I don't know if it's relevant in this one, but we do studies on the adoption of technology from different generations, and it pretty much is different. So the Gen X, the Gen Ys, and the millennials and so forth, I mean, they all have a different reaction to technology. What we see, like for the millennials, which is the new generation that has been introduced with technology in their life, I mean, it's so common. We see that their technology adoption is not an issue. In fact, it's an expectation. I should almost say that there's an app for everything. I mean, there's an app for asthma, there's an app for a fever, there's an app for whatever. So you'll see that as we kind of like see penetration of technology in society, that the adoption rates will go up.
Can I just come back on that, because there are asthma apps, but they've been rejected by people. I think we're not talking enough about the rejection of some of these technologies, not because people are anti-technology, but because they're not being designed around the other things. And if these people are more technology experts, so we don't call them patients. People with asthma are 1 in 11 of us. They're consumers. So it's not rejection of technology, it's rejection of specific technology that doesn't fit with the rest of their technology lives. And it's just, you know, where is that work happening?
Teach another program.
Anthony, you had a comment? Can we have the microphone for Anthony?
Thank you, and thanks to the panel. Listening to you and trying to think about how we'd like to drive projects in the IMI, and one thing I think that I have always been aware of is the involvement of the SMEs, the small tech companies or the novel tech companies that Lisbeth has mentioned, and so that's one thing. I also want to engage companies such as Nokia so I suppose the question is there's different pathways depending on the size of the company, but NAB specifically, as someone who came in as an SME, what would you say to other SMEs as to why they should participate in consortiums? What has your organisation got out of participating in IMI project, and how can we use that to drive their engagement, as we in the future strategies? How can we enable more small companies to participate in these collaborations?
That's a very good question. I think for us, it was initially difficult to understand kind of what was expected in IMI because our peers hadn't participated in other tech companies, in Europe had not participated, and so we didn't have, oftentimes when we apply for other types of funding, it's like, hey, can we see a copy of your grant application, and we can model it off of that. So kind of making the process a little bit more explicit for outsiders who wouldn't even know to start to engage with some of the other parties, that could be helpful. Even just the concept of not being reimbursed for all your expenses was even something that was hard for a SME to kind of accept, because that's not the way that you do things traditionally. But it's been very worthwhile for us. It's been a wonderful collaboration. I would do it again in a heartbeat. We've been able to hire staff because of it, create jobs, and so I think we would definitely do it again. We talk very highly of the whole process to others, but I think getting more penetration, I don't know to be honest. I wish more people would.
Yeah, maybe one addition. So the financial, I think, is one for small SMEs, a difficult one to take into account. But another argument I have heard is IP. So IMI has the notion of being pharma-driven, and all what you do, the IP will be owned by pharma. For technology players, they actually want, out of their IP position, they want to reuse their IP as much as possible in very different domains, including, so a same wireless device could be built in a car and could be built in a medical device. So if whatever you do with IMI is tied to, let's say, large companies, if that isn't the connotation that they have, they are, let's say, less willing to engage in IMI projects.
And to be clear, I think that's not that's a perception. That isn't how the IMI's IP position is. Yeah, I'm sure Colin will back me up on that. But I agree, perceptions are clearly important there.
So well, maybe just a little comment on that. We saw in the previous presentation also the generic principles on IPR and so forth, which are very much common of what we do in other domains as well. I mean, foreground, background, and so forth. So that's not that doesn't limit us to kind of like participate. As to the SMEs, I think we'll see a lot of innovation from SMEs. So from that perspective, we're always looking at the market as to see which particular SMEs are interesting and so forth. Nokia has a specific fund set up for IoT that can be used by startups and so forth. I mean, that's maybe even more premature than the SMEs, but yeah, I mean, it's common knowledge that doing innovation in big companies always is a little bit difficult. So you want to set up very specific, focused teams that do not carry the burden of the whole organization and can actually advance very fast. Similar, I mean, the acquisition that we did for Whittings, they're shielded behind a big wall for now from the rest of the company to make certain that they don't get defocused. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of money already flowing to the SMEs, and I think the industry at large will be participating to that, realizing that a lot of innovation comes from there.
I just want to clarify one thing, because NAB, the program you operated under was IMI1, and this problem of the SME funding was a major point for we kept on getting all the time. So we've now addressed that, so now SMEs are funded 100%. So hopefully that addresses that particular issue. Okay. But we still do recognise that getting SMEs on board is still a challenge.
Question there.
Thank you. I would like to address the panel members that we've seen here now, when the interpretation of digital health seems to be really at the far bedside of the spectrum. So there is also a large chunk of digital health that could be used for the bench side. And that is not really well represented in the examples that have been given. I'm coming from the in silico community that Dr. Gonzalez Sancho mentioned. So I was wondering, what is the take of the panel or of IMI on using digital technologies, for instance in silico modeling, in the early stages, in the low TRLs?
Question is, who from IMI wants to comment? We had in IMI1, of course, several projects that were in the area of e-toxicology, systems modeling.
Yeah, so maybe we have a project which is coming to the end on exactly this. So it's the concept was to get data which all the pharmaceutical companies had. It's basically the animal studies they have to do before they can go into human clinical trials. These data, very valuable data, but it's just, if after the study moves forward, it's not really used again. And the concept behind a particular project was to get, I think it's 13 different pharma companies, combine their data into one very high quality database to do exactly that, have in silico modeling, which can hopefully predict toxicology in advance, reduce animal use, and so on. And this is continued now, so we have a project which is kind of a follow-up from this, which is going even in larger scale, and it's trying to map not just animal toxicity, but also human toxicity, so map the whole drug development pipeline, with the idea of doing that, so having in silico models, predictive models. So we do have projects which definitely address that as well, and you know, if there's other suggestions around this, they're definitely welcome in the IMI too.
Yeah, so I guess to echo Colm's points, hijack the conversation side. If we look across what we've done as IMI as a whole, we have cheminformatics modeling projects, we have PKPD modeling projects, we have systems biology modeling projects, we have an ambition to launch something we call the Life Sciences Networks, which we would try to look at how we bring modeling and network biology together, almost as a sort of a separate systems biology theme that is kind of separate and distinct from digital health, knowing that they're part of a continuum, but needing different technologies, different specialists, and possibly different types of collaboration. So whilst today hasn't necessarily sort of highlighted all of those, they are in the annual work plan. We're seeing some really great things when you embed those types of technologies into some of the disease-specific projects that are being run in the wider IMI context, and I'm thinking of The example of UBioPred, to pick up on the colleague from Asthma UK, which has embedded disease maps and systems biological understanding of asthma biology, combining that with patient-derived biological markers in order to predict respiratory disease outcomes. And I suppose another would be the OncoTrack project, where they've built a virtual tumour model, which is now being used to in silico predict clinical trial outcomes based on a per-patient basis. So these technologies exist, they're very well supported. I mean, they're very much encouraged, and they're... so I wouldn't say that because we haven't got the focus on it today, that doesn't mean that it isn't actively participated within the IMI community and is equally part of the long-term strategy.
There's a question in the back.
I'm trying to give feedback from SME. I think there is a project called Fireware, which is the claim to be the EU version of cloud computing in order to give EU the competitive edge against competition coming from Microsoft, Google, and Apple. And within this framework, there's a smart city. There is also an IoT hub, and also the potential to make it into a stream analytic. And I'm saying that is because, as our speaker, Matthew, just talked about it, the stream analytic, which is very important for finance, but it's also very important for digital health. And I think it's very important we have a standard, an EU open source, making use of the Fireware Foundation to create this stream analytic framework. There's already a lot of component there, and what is missing is that most of the sensor right now, as I think one of the panel Elizabeth talked about the variety of health sensor. Right now, most of the sensor used in Fireware is city-oriented, you know, taking climate, temperature, and so on. I think there is a need to modify this Fireware so that it's able to cope with the potential terabyte of sensor telemetry. And we need EU Commission to look into this, because for SME, we do not want to get into, you know, pay into Microsoft or Google or something like that. We need something open source to keep us competitive. So this is very critical in component part, and also the part of that is this Fireware is very strong as a smart city standard. The location, the AI that built into it to understand the location context, and the location context and the health sensor, and this will give EU a lot of competitive edge.
Yeah, I fully agree. To give one example, in a smart city project, we today are building a protocol to check authenticity of people based on location. So that basically means if we can prove that you are at a certain location at a certain time, that can actually be used to help making sure that the data that are sent to whatever server is actually coming from you, and you are that patient that is also on or where you're trying to record a digital record from. Authenticity is very important. You don't want to be confused with another patient, right? As besides privacy is something that was not yet mentioned, but it's actually I think pretty important. So that's an example of where a digital city, or a smart city concept, which is now being explored and being implemented, could have direct implementation. But SMEs that are now looking at the smart city concepts, they will never go to the medical, because they know that let's say the threshold, the thresholds are so high to get over for them alone.
Lisbeth, can I follow up on that question? So the IT industry for many years was successful in having something like an IT roadmap, where all the big players in the field just made a projection of what is coming in the next years, so you know how you would align your value chains and what kind of technologies would be ready by when, so you have to be also ready by that time. Somehow I don't feel that we have the same alignment now in this new digital economy, and especially not in digital health. Is that something what we need? Is that something where IMI could play a role, where the Commission play a role? You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we've been thinking about a medical roadmap at IMEC for a very long time. It's not an easy one to solve. It is for sure not a direct copy of what exists out there in the semiconductor world, where you just say the next node scales down with a factor of 2, and that means your performance scales with a factor of 2, or your cost at the same cost. So it's not that easy. At the same time, what is good about this semiconductor roadmap is that, you know, all the suppliers in the world know this roadmap. They know where semiconductor industry is heading, and they've aligned. So people that are making whatever silicon wafers, or people that are making optical inspection tools, they all know that is where it is going, and they've been aligning their research roadmaps with that general roadmap, and that has helped to speed up innovation to a great extent. So a roadmap really helps, but it will not be just a copy of a semiconductor roadmap. It has to. There's probably multiple roadmaps to make, but it would be good to have a sight on where Europe would be going in the Internet of Medical Things, to make sure that SMEs know where to connect to and where to go for being able to tap on this medical use of their devices.
Where did the microphone disappear? Oh, you have it. Okay, good.
A question for either the panelists or Colm from IMI. There are different strategic governance groups. What is the level of interaction? I mean, we've often debated, and we are part of 2 SDGs. We've often debated, you know, there's useful learnings we can have between the SDGs and synergies as well. But I find this SDG to be probably most impactful across the other SDGs, and we're not part of this. So the question I have for the panelists or Colm is, what can we implement from this digital health to the existing IMI2 projects in some of the other SDGs? Because I can see so much to gain by having some interaction and some suggestions going on. So it's probably more a broad question, but I think we can take baby steps within the IMI-JU and utilize or realize its full potential, and then probably expand outside of it.
Yeah, I think this is a very excellent point, and I'd like to ask Anthony maybe to comment on it, because he's leading the SGG and the best person. If you can have a microphone, otherwise you can use mine.
Thank you. I'll bring it back. No, so you are absolutely right, and I couldn't agree more. So the first thing to say is the SGG representatives of the DKM SGG are actually sit and embed in all of the other SGGs across the network. So we have a representative that participates for my sins. I'm the immunology representative, so I attend their SGG meetings. They had one on Monday. And we look at the technology opportunities, and we look to find matching and try to say, oh, you're exploring this, well, have you seen that? So we do provide that capability of understanding. We also, as an SGG, are open and actually request that any project coming through, we actually have an opportunity to look at it. Now, we started off on doing this because we wanted to make sure that data management standards are actually being thought through properly. But it does give us the opportunity as we start thinking about how one could embed digital health capabilities into other projects. We can give reflections back on that. So again, that vehicle exists. I mean, these things all take time and energy. So it doesn't always work as perfectly as we'd agreed, but there is scope for that. And I suppose, and just to give a really concrete example, across the hallway they're talking about biopreparedness. What can we deliver there? Well, we can deliver surveillance technologies and the machine learning and the capabilities of actually using all these trillion sensors to actually potentially predict outbreaks of infection or predict infection outbreaks or or even look at emerging new threats prior to the current surveillance technology. So, I mean, that's just an example that comes from when the SDGs talk together and looking at each other. So I agree with you. We continually try to do that, and there's always opportunities to do more.
Thank you. Do we have other questions?
Yeah. Thank you for the discussion. So you have been discussing a lot on data privacy, but in my opinion, users do not care so much on their data privacy as far as they have a fair deal with the provider and as far as they are receiving an added value and a service from what they, for exchanging their data. And what I think it's missing is the second part. What is the added value? What is the service that the users are getting from all these apps or from all this social network activity? And that's the thing that it's not clear, and not so much the data privacy.
I think that's a fantastic observation, and my experiences echo what you're saying as well, to the point where when you have discussions about data privacy with younger patients, it's almost they're almost appalled that you're finding ways to limit their data sharing, you know, when they want to be sharing more. There have been cases where people have submitted an adverse event through the mobile app and then went and posted a picture of the screen on their Facebook page. And if we had thought ahead of time to try to make that connection, it would have been a privacy nightmare, and we wouldn't have done it. We didn't do it. So, but we see the generation kind of finding ways to be public in ways that we couldn't imagine just a few years ago. In terms of the give and take, I think that's been the explicit goal of our project was to, and in pharmacovigilance in general, is often to take information from patients. And we've tried to find ways to push information through the app as well, so people can make a list of drugs that they're on and get alerts when regulatory authorities have new information on those products. They can tap into WHO's database of drug problems and visualize data in a very simple manner on their devices. So those are just the first flavors of giving something back, but I think in the future we'll be pushing that much further. I don't know if it'll be within the context of this project, but I think that fundamental, right now in pharmacovigilance we rely too much on altruism and we don't reinforce kind of the individual benefit that people have from participating in that process.
It is good that you say it, because in your presentation it was not very clear what was this added value for the user. So I was wondering all the time, so okay, yeah. I would use this app, but what I would achieve for.
Yes, we actually have a paper we published on it, a motivation, incentives, and behavior model that we came up with the app that we built kind of reinforcement mechanisms around. So I can share that with you, but it's something we take very seriously. I just had to simplify for the sake of this.
Thank you. There was one question over there.
I think what I'd just say to follow up on privacy filtering, I know from MHRA, sorry, I think what I'd say to follow up on the privacy question and linking to the technology evolution is that we know that our legislation cycles kind of move in roughly 10-year blocks. And of course, as Anthony showed on his first slide, technology moves in 1-year blocks and exponentially increases in that regard. And I think some of the barriers that come up with use of technology are often related, whether it's privacy or whether it's pharmacovigilance legislation, are often related to our perhaps inability from the legislative regulation cycle to be able to move at the same speed, or at least incrementally in steps, rather than as a big block of change, which is something that's a challenge for us. I think within WebRadar, one of the things that we've spent a lot of time working on is exactly these legal requirements and ensuring that we remain compliant. And it's really important that we find ways to evolve the technology and the legislation in step rather than being completely out of step as we do that. And I think the parallel to that is the healthcare system, which clearly is very restricted, very restrained from a privacy perspective, and understandably so. but at the same time, that almost and equally constrained from a time respect, and I guess a concern coming from that area is about volume of data. I think what we've seen within WebRadar is that the information that we've identified is incredibly useful in really specific areas. There's loads of information about tolerance, about misuse, abuse. There's really specific disease areas and therapies where there's much more information in social media than there is in traditional data. And yet in other areas, there really isn't anything that adds to what we've got. And so how we target these technologies is a really important and interesting area, and that's probably where the value add is over what we have now. But I'd be interested to hear the panel's thoughts.
Now, important point on this issue about the pace of the technology development and regulation, legislation. Legislation is never going to be able to follow the pace of technology development. I don't think it's even the purpose anymore to try and do that. But what's important, I would say, is especially in this area, privacy legislation, to have the right principles in the legislation, because those stand. Okay, principles. These notions around consent, value, things like that. What matters is, of course, the enforcement. How these principles are applied, because then the reality changes. Value moves, possibilities from technology evolve, but I think there has to be some consistency in implementing these principles, and this is where it's quite important to have the feedback from the ground of the things that are really happening. To give a clear example around privacy, it's important to respect consent and things like that, but it's important to follow I would say, to track where the value is going. Okay, we heard many times that for young generation, they share much more willingly their data. That's fine, but where are those data going? Where is this value going? Who is capturing that? I think that's the sort of things that the stable regulatory principles should try and catch. Is that value, because data are the currency of the digital age, right? So where is this value going? Is this concentrated in a few hands? That's the sort of things that those implementing the regulation should be looking at, I would say.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I think there's 3 layers to that. I mean, one obviously is privacy with respect to the technology itself. It cannot be hacked, you cannot intrude it, and so forth. The second thing is the legislation, where you kind of set some rules. But then the third thing is really public awareness. I mean, in the sense that people just throw their information out on the market, not probably understanding all of the full consequences of that. And that might be totally legal in terms of that, but I think certainly the newer generations need to be taught a little bit more about how you protect your identity and your information and so forth. And if you explain, I mean, I have kids of 15 and 17, if I explain them that if all of that information can be used by one of their future employers to kind of see whether or not they are fit, if they are smart and stuff like that and so forth, they start thinking about it a little bit differently. But that awareness needs to grow, and that's also something that we need to do as a society, and regulation will not really help there. I mean, it's really human behavior.
Yeah, I just have one comment regarding the sustainability thing that was mentioned on the Radar project. Is that something that would be encouraged in future projects? Because, I mean, we've seen in IMI a very good project generating knowledge, and but after that, there's always going to be questions about, is that going to be producing an output that is economically and commercially viable? In a way that would also take into consideration something that was mentioned earlier, which is the competition coming from outside. Because if we don't do it this way, someone else will do it and will basically capture the market in Europe.
I think that's a very good question, and the topic of sustainability of project outcomes has been discussed quite intensively inside IMI over the last years. I don't know if Colin wants to comment more. Just this one, yeah.
May I?
Sorry, I just want to answer that question on sustainability. So it's a very good point, and for us it's crucial that our projects have a lasting legacy, that they don't just stop after the funding runs out. And as Torsten said, this is something we have addressed. So in all our current projects, we always ask the participants to think of sustainability from the word go. Even when they're putting their application together, sustainability is one of the key elements, and actually in their evaluation, the impact of what their project will be, i.e. not just during the project lifetime, but what the results actually mean, is one of the key evaluation criteria. So it's a major focus of IMI under the Horizon 2020 program, and it was perhaps a little bit missing in some of the earlier projects, although we also have various mechanisms to address that as well. So it's a very good point, and we are hopefully addressing it.
I think there was one more question.
I have a question. Chris Moder, Soft Systems. I have a question with regard to innovation and competitiveness with regard to, for example, US. Current system works top-bottom, yes? It's, imagine like in farmer's life. You tell one farmer, we need grain, another, we need potatoes, we need carrots. You tell 1 year ahead. And why not try reverse the situation to have bottom-up? You organize market where all farmers are bringing whatever you need, food, and you come to the market and say, okay, I need potatoes, potatoes already there. You don't need to order them in advance. So SMEs are actually bringing the ideas. You don't pay them if you don't use it. You don't give grants, you don't make reviews, it doesn't cost you nothing. Yes? You just come and you take whatever you need. Of course, then you pay. But before you need it, you don't pay in advance. You put all risk on them, yes, but you let them bring ideas, because maybe they get ideas that you might not even consider at the moment. And there is some mad genius that is ahead of his time or her time and brings some ideas, some products, services, and it comes time, wow, that was that. What about considering that kind of approach? Thank you.
So if I understand you correctly, what you are talking about is a bit more flexibility in the funding model to be allowed to take partners on when you need them on technology aspects that you haven't foreseen at the beginning of the project. That's of course today already possible.
Creating space where everybody can register without rigid rules, and if you need something, you then check, you then screen.
So
Not
it's
before.
so more a virtual market space for offerings that are out there.
It's exactly like on market space when you have some rules, there are, so it's everything is according to the rules. Yeah? Whatever mayor says, it is. But you don't pay anything in advance. You let them think, okay, I will produce fast, but nobody needs fast, my problem. But everybody needs fast, and nobody orders fast in 1 year.
Yeah, well, we'll take the idea of a market space back in the SGG and discuss it. Thank you very much.
Maybe one comment. So sometimes it feels like you guys are learning to drive an old Dodge while we have all the components around to build an autonomous car. But we don't get the components together. So I think that, that the roadmap may actually help there. So if we say Europe wants to build an autonomous car, who can contribute potatoes? Then, then we may find a better way to align.
So I think we'll give the closing words to Anthony.
I was going to say thank you. So the comments that you've just made are not dissimilar to comments to discussions we've had. The comments I made earlier about how to engage SMEs. There are novel models that IMI, as part of Horizon 2020, can use. We are exploring how to use those because the idea of accelerators, the idea of moving the risk around so it's phased in different ways, they're possible. They are forging new pathways within the infrastructure and the instrumentation of the IMI that haven't been tried before, so they are slow to develop. But I think, to Torsten's point, everything you've just suggested in terms of being able to turn this model around are actually things that we'd very much like to encourage. we are actively trying to explore ways to deliver sort of steps in that direction. So maybe our markets are quite small. We might have a diabetes market, we might have a respiratory market rather than a complete open market of all technologies to start off with. So that's maybe, but point is well taken, and ideas about how that could work and how much risk various SMEs are prepared to take could actually be very insightful in terms of being able to justify that.